way the presidential debates are set up. There have been many, many complaints that the moderators are biased one way or another, that the questions are not comprehensive enough, and that the format of the debate where, each candidate only gets 2-minute responses is just not very informative for the general public. So I think the whole system needs to be reformed.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, there's been a lot of talk already about the moderators who are a part of these debates, about the system that's been set up around them after our first debate, questions about whether or not there's even, the whole system needs to be reformed, starting with the Commission on Presidential Debates that oversees these, calls itself nonpartisan, when in fact it's actually bipartisan. Carrie, I mean, what do you think about, the news that Steve Scully was suspended, but also does that just continually taint this debate process that seems to get more dysfunctional every election cycle?
Well, taint is probably the right word here. I'm sure a lot of people think that's exactly what he is. It's no surprise either, or it's certainly a huge coincidence that Twitter, as we speak, appears to be down globally. So who knows? But naughty is naughty. And when people study journalism, one of the first things they're taught is be honest, because you are the voice and the eyes of the people who can't get to the places you're able to get to. So you have a responsibility. And if you screw that up, well, you do need to be radically punished. It's interesting. The Constitution says nothing about debates. So this is a recent invention. And it's kind of remarkable that the president of the United States, for the first time probably in all human history, has become the disease vector of this continent. I mean, what an extraordinary thing. It's like if he had syphilis, just like handing it out left and right, people dropping like flies. Just last week, he was at the Pentagon with his one remaining chief of staff. Oh, my God, what a miracle. So I think we have a lot of fun in store.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Niko, aside from the issue of just the debate itself, Carrie just mentioned about, Twitter possibly being down globally, but there's another major story that's breaking, of course, over the last few days regarding Twitter and this New York Post article. Now, we can talk about the Hunter Biden story separately. I think that is an issue in and of itself. But to me, the bigger story of what is taking place surrounding this Hunter Biden story and the New York Post story with emails that reportedly came from Hunter Biden's laptop that seemed to confirm that former Vice President Biden had a meeting with a board member of Burisma, is the fact that Twitter began blocking the sharing of that article, blocking even DMs containing the links. Jack Dorsey came out yesterday and said that it was handled the wrong way. But is this going to be a growing kind of narrative in these last 3 weeks as we head up towards the election? Because tech companies have already said that they're going to prevent advertising in the last 3 weeks, but they hadn't mentioned anything about blocking stories in those last 3 weeks. How much does this kind of suck up some of the oxygen in the room, as it were?
To be frank, Ben, I think it's actually terrifying. And what I think it illustrates more than anything else is that whether or not you like or dislike Donald Trump, whether or not you plan on voting for him or not, it does establish the fact that at least the tech industry and the neoliberal media, which, to be frank, kind of dominates the conversation, is on the side of one candidate, and that candidate is not Donald Trump, and it seems to be for Joe Biden. And to be frank, they've been like, Twitter put out a lie yesterday and put it at, on their header, saying that Washington Post said that Joe Biden did not fire the prosecutor in the Ukraine. And Joe Biden himself said he got the prosecutor in the Ukraine fired. And yet that Washington Post article was not taken down, that the author of that article was not reprimanded. And I mean, it was an article from 2019. So it seems to me that there is a clear bias, and regardless of whatever way you vote, it should bother you that the bias is swinging in favor of one candidate or another, or one party or another, because at the end of the day, what that truly means is that we're not going to get accurate information. And of course, that's all that we should be receiving from these journalists. And of course, when it comes to the social media space, that should be a public forum. And that should not be tampered with. Regardless, I mean, yeah, the First Amendment, the Constitution, and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, these social media juggernauts should not be the arbiters of what is true and what is not. That should be left up to the people. I am one of those hardcore free speech absolutists. And if you can't see an email and determine whether or not it's true or false, see information, and then, of course, substantiate or corroborate that information with other concurrent information, then that's kind of like a personal problem. But it is not a problem that Twitter should be solving on behalf of the voters.
Well, and you're also describing something called journalism, right? The idea that journalists are supposed to be able to do their jobs without there being a final consensus that comes from a tech company. I want to get deeper into this issue, but before I do, Carrie, I let something slide there for a minute. I think we need to comment on the term you use, disease vector. Can we talk about that for a minute? Lauren, do you have a comment on that? Because I didn't quite understand what you were saying. Are you essentially saying that the president is like a tornado of disease going around the country infecting people? Would I understand that correctly? Is that what you were saying?
Actually, that's a pretty voluptuous and gorgeous metaphor. I can't claim that since you just invented it. But I mean literally and technically, when he got COVID, he became a disease vector. He gave it to multiple staff members who all acknowledge this freely. Just today, we learned that his own son had it. Of course, it took about a week for that to come out. In fact, it took many days for it to come out that he even had it, because he will be the first human ever in medical history to have tested positive, literally got it on a Thursday, and on Friday showing symptoms. It's a miracle of progression. And then within 3 days, poof, cured. So this is pretty extraordinary stuff. But during that time, all these people in his staff in the White House milling about, touching his papers, this and that, maskless and whatever, if you believe the coronavirus is real. I know about 219,000 Americans are dead. They may be kidding, pardon the sarcasm, but we're sort of sitting in that weird Orwellian orgasm, aren't we, in the United States here, where we're talking about journalists. And I had lunch with the West Coast bureau chief of the AP a couple of years ago, and I asked him, I said, I haven't seen a story on DU, depleted uranium, in like 10 years. The stuff, the side effects of nuclear power plants have depleted uranium. It's then used by the U.S. military. They coat bombs with it because it's a very dense, heavy metal, and it cuts like a hot knife through butter when it hits a tank. Extraordinary stuff. Then when the bombs explode, they aerosolize into billions of microscopic metallic particulates, and people all over the Middle East are suffering from a variety of different cancers because of this. It's controversial but unknown, apparently, in the U.S., notwithstanding Vieques, where all the bombing runs happened. So he said, well, what's DU? And I'm thinking, this is the West Coast bureau chief of the AP, a man who can summit all of Earth's information to his dinner table with the snap of a finger. How does he not know this basic stuff, which you guys have talked about on RT for many years? This is what we call journalism today. They're experts at spying on Michael Jackson. But when we get into the real stuff that really matters, it's Donald Trump's hairdo, it's Joe Biden's hammock naps.
Okay, so let's go. Okay, I'm trying to follow where you were on this. But when we're talking about the COVID part of it, because a lot got covered there. When we're talking about the COVID part of it, so Lauren, the issue becomes this with COVID. It seems to me that there is right now in this country a belief that no one should be contracting this, and anyone who does is somehow derelict because they did contract COVID in the first place. Now, we know that if 200,000 people have died from COVID and millions of people have contracted it, because we know that many people are asymptomatic, that the issue, is it really that you contract COVID, or is it that many people will contract it, and at some point, as viruses do, it will spread through the population? So should the president be treated like patient zero because he contracted COVID?
Well, we have two kind of simultaneous contradicting narratives going on. On the one hand, coronavirus is everywhere. It's this pandemic that will affect at least someone you know, if not multiple people, and yourself. It's unavoidable. It's going to happen to you if you dare to leave your house. So that's one narrative going on. On the other hand, we also have the narrative that Donald Trump is somehow an outlier for catching coronavirus. How could he have been so stupid? Those two narratives don't really fit together. And I think it was actually interesting once Trump did manage to have a speedy recovery. Thank goodness how it really did. I would have thought show some people that coronavirus, it's not that we shouldn't take it seriously, but it is not in and of itself a death sentence. And there have been more studies that have been done about people's ability to spread it on when they're asymptomatic. And, you know, those studies are very encouraging because it goes to show that perhaps coronavirus is not as contagious as we initially thought, at least once people are no longer showing those symptoms. So Trump has been cleared for events by his doctors, thank goodness. I wish everybody within his administration who had it a speedy recovery. I'm not quite sure how this ended up spiraling into a huge news story, frankly, because there are so many Americans and people really worldwide who have dealt with the exact same thing and are also, for the most part, thankfully fine as well.
But Niko, when we talk about the coronavirus, I mean, the reality is if we look at the average age of death from the coronavirus, it's 78. That's the average age of death, which also happens to be the same average age of death, period, in the United States, right? And so this idea that, coronavirus is an automatic death sentence, we know that's not true. But we also see currently, especially in states where a lot of people are hurting right now. Kids can't be in school. A lot of people have lost their jobs. We're still looking at massive amounts of unemployment. There are a lot of people who want to see us come out of coronavirus. And the president it seems like he's picked up on this theme of saying, don't just fear it and don't see it as this fear that rules your life. Does that message resonate, or are people looking at the president and saying, you're not taking this seriously enough? Because I can really see there being at least, if not more than this, at least two camps of people, some who say it's not as serious as the prescription to save us from it, that the solutions that we're being given for it are worse than the virus itself, and then another group that says, no, it is very serious and it's too serious. So you have like these dueling ideas. Do Biden and Trump become the faces of those dueling camps?
Yeah, and actually, I think it's by design, and I think that should be a third camp. I think it exists, but not to the degree that it should. And that third camp should be, why are we not really having discussion about the solutions that have already been presented and have worked in other countries like ANTIFA and Alpha 2B in Cuba? It's something that's worked. It's something that we've seen the effects of over time because it's been around for about 40 years. It's worked in Africa to a large degree, and it literally replenishes the interferon that the COVID-19 virus is known to take away. And yet we don't have a single politician in Congress or even Trump himself discussing this. And of course, as we know, about a month ago, Pfizer and another pharmaceutical company got a $2 billion deal to create a vaccine for something they'd never been able to create a vaccine for before. And then, of course, you have to question then the benefits of the fear tactic narrative, which is we can't give you any money or we won't give you any money, but you also can't go on about your daily lives. And then, of course, they say, well, you can go on about your daily lives when you get the vaccine. And in my opinion, that's disingenuous. And if we're going to consider the profit motive in every other aspect of the pharmaceutical industry when we're having that discussion, if we're going to consider the profit motive when we're talking about how the FDA and other organizations have lied about marijuana usage, kratom usage, and things of that nature, when we're going to look at the profit motive that these lobbyists get there, Pfizer was the second largest donor to the lobbying donors to the legislature, and look, they just got all their money back just like that. Then you can't say that there isn't something fishy going on. And of course, I think that there has been like a weaponization of COVID by both the left and the right. I do believe that at times Trump has taken it a little bit too lax, but he has his finger on the pulse where Americans do want to get back to work or at least be able to have some type of livelihood as this blows over. But on the other side of that fence, people were talking about wearing masks. However, I would rather, not have to wear masks because we already are using the available solutions that have worked in other countries. And so I think that when it gets right down to it, we really have to get to the heart of COVID-19 and kind of like break through all of these narratives, which, by the way, Ben, I've seen you've done a fantastic job doing. A lot of my reporting about COVID has come from your reporting. But I do think that we need to discuss the politicization of COVID-19 more often than we see most mainstream journalists or even independent journalists do.
Well, I appreciate your words there. So something that I think is going to be happening in these town halls tonight is COVID obviously is going to come up. It seems like it's the biggest story right now in the country. And let me just go around with you guys. And Carrie, I'll start with you. What do you think are going to be the biggest issues these candidates hit on tonight? My personal guess is that Trump is going to hit very hard on the Biden corruption angle. That's what he's going to go after. And Biden is going to go after the Trump corona angle. That's what it seems like to me that they would go after. What do you think they'll be going after tonight? And what do you think they can say tonight? I ask each of you this as well. What do you think they can say tonight that would actually move the needle in their direction? Carrie?
Well, more will be revealed, right? Donald Trump most certainly will go after what was in the New York Post. What more can you say? He also seems to resurrect Hillary constantly, and that's going to hurt her campaign this many years later. I mean, a lot of it is just twaddle and nonsense, as opposed to talking about the real stuff that he actually is responsible for as the commander in chief. I naturally take some exception with this purveyor of ladies' footwear and grabber of vulvas, et cetera, a guy who orders women's uteruses to be carved out down at the border, putting children in cages. Now, listen, I'm not a fan of the Third Reich, and I'm never going to be. So I take serious exception. My family came over on the Mayflower. 2 of my ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. So this kind of behavior is seriously uncool and, in my view, un-American. That said, I'm not a big lover of Joe Biden, but I don't have much of a choice here. This is like a meal with 2 kind of unappetizing things on the dinner table, let's face it. So I can have this one, or I can have the other one that at least has probably more potential nutrition. Now, is Joe Biden great? I don't think so. I think we all have to hold our nose a little bit. Some people may really love him. I haven't met that person yet. I know people were jazzed about Buttigieg. They were jazzed about a lot of people who had spark and glow and imagination, and they were progressive. Joe Biden is not progressive. He's, as my friend there refers to, as a neoliberal. I mean, he is just a classic establishment kind of guy. But the only thing he could do is offer jobs, because we have probably 100 million Americans truly unemployed. After 6 months in this country, not like Europe, but in this country, you stop getting counted as unemployed because you're no longer in the W-2 system. So we have massive unemployment. We have 59 million people right now on food assistance. And where I live in Los Angeles, you can see lines of cars, blocks and blocks long, people just getting boxes of food to eat. And these are not only just people who are single, then there's people who have to feed their families. This stuff is real. It makes the Depression in the 1920s look different only because we have Netflix to luxuriate around, and Hulu and Amazon Prime and all kinds of wonderful entertainment. But if you got rid of all of that, it would be The Walking Dead on the sidewalks. And where I live, on the sidewalks, they're now called curbside communities. You take the homeless and you just sort of turn it into a development project, and they have tents. And I mean, this stuff is not going away. So if Biden doesn't address that, we know Trump will never mention it. But if Biden doesn't address it, I don't know what people can expect out of him.
So let me ask you this, though. Are those Trump's policies creating that? When you're in Los Angeles, correct? I am assuming from your T-shirt.
Yeah.
Their T-shirts.
I'm in West Hollywood.
Is that
it's the
right,
seedy part of
is
Los
that
Angeles?
The policies of Governor Newsom? Is that policies of the state of California, or are those Trump's policies that are creating those communities you're talking about?
Actually, in some ways, we had Hoovervilles back during the original Depression. Now we have, I call them Trump towns. If these curbside communities. But really, this was born out of King Ronald I when he ascended the throne in the 1980s. What he did is they dismantled what we used to call loony bins, insane asylums, mental health facilities, whatever. And the pharmaceutical companies, principally the ones that made Prozac, the very first one that was commonly used for a couple of decades before Zoloft and all the other ones emerged. Well, the deal was that the pharmaceutical companies would get to release this stuff. Ronald Reagan could boast that he was closing down this stuff and curing all these crazy people. And now they have lived on the sidewalk for so long that we don't even see them. Ask a New Yorker. You just step over them. Ask someone in LA as the homeless guy is vomiting on the tires of a Bentley or a Rolls Royce. I kid you not. It's this kind of stuff, but you don't see it. You sort of filter it out because it's been decades long. Go to Switzerland. If there's a guy who's homeless barfing on the steps of a boutique, the police come and haul him away, and they put him away because you can't run a business with this kind of stuff on the sidewalk. But it's normal now. Is it worse under Trump? Sure. Why? Well, the coronavirus is much to blame. But Mitch McConnell, I mean, who doesn't love Mitch McConnell? Woohoo! There's a piece of work. You know, let's just not help anybody. Let's just definitely not help anybody. Well, the not helping anybody starting November 1st, just a couple of weeks from now, when the moratorium on foreclosing houses goes away, millions of people will be kicked out of their houses. That means their credit is going to suck because unlike in Europe or other places where, Ben, they're watching your show, they don't have the same kind of system. Here, everything is tagged to your credit rating. When you get foreclosed, you can't go rent an apartment because you have bad credit. You're a bad credit risk and you probably don't have a job. Where are you going to live? California. Swimming pools and movie stars. Let's face it, winter is about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that? 28 centigrade. Not a bad place to live. And we do feed the homeless here. But that's the situation and the condition we live in. And there is no cure and no effort to cure it right now. Our governor does what he can, but it's up to the local municipalities. Another weird vagary of our government. The local municipalities have to handle the people within their own systems. And nobody wants to pay even a penny more tax to do something about the homeless yet until the homeless guy.
Listen, I agree. Yeah. It's a huge problem. There's no question about that. But to lay it all at the feet of Trump. So, Lauren, let me ask you this, because here's one of the problems I think Biden would have in a year where he's really being challenged and media ask some of these real questions because they're not asking him real questions. But one of the questions they should be asking, because I think Carrie makes a great point. You have severe problems in this country with mental health issues and with homeless issues. But President Obama and Vice President Biden did not make it better during 8 years. Now Trump's been in for 4 years. You can't lay all of it at his feet, can you?
Absolutely, you can't. And as someone who has actually lived in LA before, I'm glad Carrie mentioned that the homeless problem has been going on for decades because, you know, those 10 cities were there before Trump and they will be there after Trump so long as California keeps chasing away business. People want to work. The answer to homelessness is not to just keep taxing people higher and higher, because guess what? That's what California's been doing for ages. And places like San Francisco and Los Angeles are no better off than they were before. Under the Trump administration, before the recession caused by coronavirus, which no country has been immune to, there was record low unemployment for Black people, Hispanic people, and for women. And how was that accomplished? It was through deregulation, right? There is an amazing amount of human capital and entrepreneurialism and just ingenuity in the United States. These people are hungry for work. And I think, you know, to get back to your original question, in his town hall tonight, I think that Trump is going to be hitting the economy hard. Polls show that people trust Trump on the economy more than Biden. They remember the tax cuts, right? They remember the low unemployment. And coming out of coronavirus, people are going to be looking for more of that economic stimulus, which Biden doesn't have the same track record on as Trump does.
Well, and let me just follow up on that, Lauren, because the economy in any kind of a normal year is the number one issue that people care about. The media is telling us that coronavirus is the number one issue. But is it? Is the coronavirus the number one issue, or is the economy still that number one issue? It's just getting overshadowed in terms of media coverage.
I think it depends on who you ask. Trump's base as a whole is very, very focused on the economy and on reopening. We see that among independents as well. Democrats, from what I've seen, they are more willing to stay under lockdown, right? Their concern is more coronavirus. Now, I think part of that is probably due to media selection, right? If you watch something like CNN, MSNBC, you're going to be pounded with coronavirus nonstop. So it makes sense that these people would be most concerned about. For the Trump administration, however, I think when it comes to COVID, they should have done a much better job at explaining how exactly the federal government works in relation to states. I kept seeing people asking, why doesn't Trump do more? Why doesn't Trump do more? And it's like, well, because he is president, not king, and because governors ultimately are the ones who should be deciding what policies work best for their states. So, I mean, not to say that Trump handled the situation perfectly. He absolutely did not. But I think there's also a little bit of a lack of understanding about the separation of powers when it comes to federal versus state levels.
Sure. And when we talk about, Niko, this idea of governors, that brings in swing states, right? Because you have states like Michigan, you have states like Pennsylvania, you have states like Florida that are the Ohio, the swing states that really make a difference in a presidential election. Wisconsin would be one of those states, certainly this year. And so when we look at those swing states, is the way that governors have treated the coronavirus, their response to it, does that, for lack of a better term, trump the president's positions on coronavirus? Which one are voters going to repudiate more? Are they going to repudiate the way their governors have behaved or the way the president behaves? And how does that play into a national election in just 3 weeks?
I'm going to answer that in a second, but I have to address everything that was just said from everybody. The truth about the way Trump has handled the economy and Gavin Newsom in California have handled their economy, for example, is somewhere in between both of them. California is the #1 state for gainfully employed homeless people. That's nothing to do with Donald Trump per se. The market crash had a lot to do with how mortgage loans were handled. These people lost their houses. They went bankrupt. And no matter, they're making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. But of course, they can't get in a house now because they went bankrupt. And then on top of that, you can't rent at a nicer property or a decent one at that, especially in California, if you have bankruptcy on your application, or at least it's very hard to do so. And so you'll see people get up, get dressed, and go to a regular 9-to-5 job and be homeless. You can't blame that on Donald Trump whenever it was happening under Obama, while Gavin Newsom is governor. You can't say, well, we have to leave that up to municipality governments, but that's not what Gavin Newsom said when he was running for president on making sure that the economy worked for everybody in California. Now, on the other side of that fence, Trump's deregulation may have helped the stock market, it may have helped Wall Street, and may have even helped a lot of banks, but it hasn't helped everybody. He even admitted himself that the unemployment numbers are trumped up. I can have 2 part-time jobs, and I can't file for unemployment if I make just barely enough to not qualify for it. So what does that look like? It looks like unemployment's going down. What if I've been on unemployment so long where the number where I can't qualify for it anymore because I've been on it for a year? I know it's in a year in North Carolina. I think it's roughly a year in Florida where I live. And now you're no longer on unemployment. Does that mean that more people are gainfully employed with a livable wage? No, that's not what that means. And so people concoct these numbers and everybody wants to blame one side or the other. But at the end of the day, if Joe Biden or Donald Trump actually wants to convince anyone to get on their side, how about challenging the corporations who are rotting our economic system from the inside out? How about challenging the corporate lobbyists who are buying out Congress? I know that people want to blame Trump for the tax plan that got introduced by Congress, but it wasn't solely him, and the Democrats largely voted in favor of it. How about somebody say they're not going to go to war with China, Russia, or Iran when they become president, and at least Trump seems to not want to go to war with one of those three, which I guess is better than Biden. How about anybody say that we demand a stimulus package right now, which, by the way, to give Trump credit, he's the one who signed the executive order to extend unemployment. Going back to Gavin Newsom, till this day, he still has not added the extra $100 that Trump put in as a provision to add on to the $300 that he put in the executive order. So is that Trump's fault that Gavin Newsom? That's a compromise, in my humble opinion. right? I can't give you
Okay,
everything,
but let me ask you
but I'll
this
give
then.
you most of it. And I will leave
Right.
it up to your governors to determine what's best for your state. And it seems like, once again, people are more concerned with playing political games than they are with helping the people. And I think that's something that should have been commended by Trump. And we might have actually got a stimulus package if people notice. He extended the moratorium, by the way, on evictions and mortgage loans. He extended the moratorium on that, if I recall, through 2020. And he also got unemployment.
So here's
what
a
if
question though
Democrats
on
gave
that.
you
Let me ask you
credit
this.
for that? Go ahead.
Right. Let me ask you this though, based on what you're saying though, because you take that issue in particular of unemployment checks, of the moratoriums on evictions, the push for more stimulus money. The president's been asking for it, but clearly this thing is like a political football, right? The Democrats come up with their $2.2 trillion plan. Republicans say, well, we're not going to deal with that plan. We want to do something different. But the bottom line is, and I want to go quickly through each of you on this one. So I'll let you pick up, Niko, from there, and then I want to hear from the other two. But staying on this particular issue, it seems disgusting to me that we cannot get a deal done because there's an election 3 weeks away. And so the American people who did not create coronavirus, the American people who did not call for lockdowns, the people who are unemployed, the businesses that are being lost, the people who are struggling are not getting the help they need because it becomes a political issue. And why or who would voters hold responsible for that? Who will they hold responsible for that? And should they hold the president or the Democratic Party, i.e. Joe Biden, who says he is the Democratic Party? Who do they hold responsible? Niko?
I think highly informed voters will go case by case. For example, I think actually Ron DeSantis did one of the best jobs out of all the governors in the country, specifically concerning coronavirus. I live here in Miami. He allowed the Democratic mayors of the three largest counties here, West Palm, Broward, and Miami-Dade, to analyze the situation for themselves and then make decisions regarding COVID based on their needs. In my opinion, I'm all about less paternalism when it comes to situations like that, because the governor can't be everywhere at once. On the other hand, Gavin Newsom took control of a bunch of hotels and didn't fill them. He took money and put it seemingly everywhere other than the people's pockets. And so I do think it'll be, it kind of is like a requisite for the people to inform themselves rather than listening to Joe Biden, Donald Trump, CNN, or Fox News to figure out who to blame. Figure out who was directly in charge of your job, your businesses, like Miami-Dade was giving out rental assistance. The mayor should have probably got a little bit of credit for that, et cetera. And then make decisions based off of that. And of course, figure out who's looking for solutions.
Okay, Lauren, go ahead.
Well, first off, I want to say that Niko's absolutely right. It really depends on what issue you're looking at. If you're upset about something like your state's lockdown, that is a state issue, something the governor is probably responsible for. If you're upset about something like travel restrictions, that's more federal jurisdiction. So I would hope that going into polls, voters have taken the time to familiarize themselves with the issues they're passionate about and actually found, like Niko said, who is responsible for what, rather than just saying, oh, I think Trump is responsible, I think my governor, without actually knowing. But if I could, I would like to make a quick point about unemployment, because that's something that we've brought up and there have been some things said that I just want to clarify. So there are several different metrics for measuring unemployment. The first one is the most common one, and that is the number of people who are actively seeking jobs and who are out of work, right? So that has gone down. That had previously gone down under Trump before coronavirus, right? You also have other metrics of measuring unemployment that include people who are also out of work, but not looking for work anymore, right? So they've, largely become so demoralized, they don't think they can find a job anymore, or, there may be someone like the elderly or things like that. That second measurement relates to workforce participation rates. And I just want to say, to Carrie's point, workforce participation rates under President Trump were also up. So those low unemployment numbers were not just a case of, there were some people who had just stopped looking for jobs altogether, right? Because there are metrics that take that into account as well. well. And when we're also talking about the unemployment rate, we are not just talking about unemployment or jobless claims, as Niko referred to. That is a separate issue. Jobless claims under Trump, again, before coronavirus, were down. But when it comes to the issue he mentioned of, what if you're just working 2 jobs and not able to pay your rent? That's not necessarily better. With the Trump administration, what we actually found that wages were going up for workers because there was more competitiveness in the job market. Employers were having actually, in some cases, trouble finding workers, and they were forced to increase their wages in some cases. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, and then Carrie, just your thoughts real quick on this issue of, essentially the fact that really the American people have been held up for weeks now on not getting a deal done. And Democrats and Republicans can go back and forth. They can claim that, their party leadership is saying this, or the other party doesn't want to give us everything we want. And while they do that, you have small businesses that are going out of business. You have 40% of restaurants in New York, I believe it is, where the numbers show they're not coming back at all. At what point do voters hold accountable politicians who are playing the political game instead of helping them, which is what they're there to do?
Well, I guess first we need to identify a time when voters did hold politicians accountable for anything.
Well,
that's
true.
Probably such a dim memory for most people, if it's a memory at all. The Republicans are really good at many, many things, one of which is they have balls and they own them and they stand up strong. Look at Mitch McConnell, 300 bills presented on his desk, hasn't introduced one of them, won't even bring them to the floor. That takes balls. Now, Nancy Pelosi, she's not strong. Look at Chuck Schumer. There's another one. I'm not a Democrat, by the way. I'm independent. Proud to be that way, but I do not support Donald Trump, and I think I made that clear earlier. This is important. One of the things that, looking at someone like Chuck Schumer, he always talks about how disappointed he is, and this is speaking to your point here, Ben. He's disappointed. Let me give you the definition of disappointment. Disappointment is when your summer home on Nantucket, in one of the rooms, the servants forgot to polish the silver. That's disappointing. But not getting money to the taxpayers that belongs to them back, if that's the case, that's not disappointing. That's goddamn outrageous. And Chuck Schumer is not outraged. Nancy Pelosi is not outraged. But Republicans do get outraged. Whether I agree with their position or not, they stand for something. And it's a sad thing when the opposition party doesn't even oppose. It's just kind of silent. The average Democrat is like a Republican in slow motion. They just sort of allow it to happen by complicity. It takes about 6 months longer. I think if Joe Biden said, look, goddammit, enough of this. Donald Trump, you are a bloviating puck fist. You are a sesquipedalian octopus, whatever. Enough of this. You're P.T. Barnum in your best moment. And really just stood up to the guy and stood up for what he believes in. But we have yet to find out what that real hardcore belief is. With Donald Trump, we know what his belief is. You're a loser if you get coronavirus and die. And here's a guy who got cured on Obamacare, federal health care. Most people, let's just take Mildred in Ohio. She doesn't get helicopter service to her hospital. She doesn't have a team of physicians huddling around her. Pharmaceutical companies, what would you like? How about a double? This is not her case. Obamacare is what cured Donald Trump. Are we allowed to say that? Should he refund the cost of that? I wonder what retail for helicopter service, teams of physicians, anesthesiologists, every aspirin. That's probably pretty expensive. It's got to run millions.
Well, you've gone into the issue of healthcare and coronavirus. So we have our first soundbite from tonight from a town hall where Joe Biden is in Philadelphia, and he is talking tonight about mask mandates. Let's listen to this.
That if, in fact, we wore masks, we could save between now and the end of the year 100,000 lives.
And avoid lockdowns?
And avoid lockdown, yes. You don't have to lock down if you're wearing the mask.
Let's get a question.
Okay, you heard him there. So he says mask mandates. He tells George Stephanopoulos they will not have to lock down. if you allow people to wear masks, which I don't know where that is coming from. That's a whole new statement that I've never heard before. But I want to read you something else. This is something else he said that was not part of what we played. He says that how would you enforce a mask mandate? Because Biden wants a mask mandate across the country. Now, please keep in mind, panel, if Joe Biden becomes president, he does not take office until late January of 2021. So any mask mandate that would be instituted would then be instituted across the country beginning, in February of 2021 and then running for however long. But this is what he says. How would you enforce that? How would you make that happen? He says, I would go to every mayor. I would go to every councilman. I would go to every local official and say, mandate the mask. Apparently so that you don't have to lock down anymore. That's what he's now saying. So first of all, how do you think voters will respond to this idea? I mean, just the idea of permanent masking, at least for the foreseeable next, year, 2 years? How long are we talking here, Carrie? We're going to have to wear masks forever? Is that what the Biden campaign promises?
Well, I mean, that is about as crazy as anything. And I'm just going to tell you why and give you an exact example. So I live in West Hollywood. This is the same place where the mayor hired, during a city council meeting, was on an adult app on his phone, picked up one of the constituents, went and had sex with this constituent, and then hired the guy as his deputy for $130,000 a year to go, hello, mayor's office. So that's West Hollywood. This is a place where you can wear a mask, but you're still going to have sex with people. You're still touching. So what good does the mask do? It's folly. It's complete nonsense, but it sounds good politically. And I think both Lauren and Niko, pardon me there, I think you'll agree it's completely ridiculous unless you are in total and complete isolation, but then you don't need the mask. So it's a Band-Aid that's 10 miles away from the wound.
It's the brilliant person who drives around in their car wearing a mask by themselves, Niko. I mean, what are we doing with this idea of mandating a mask for everyone in the country, which, as you know, in Florida, where you are, Niko, the mask has not only been, they've been freed from the mask there, but your governor, Ron DeSantis, issued an order stating that no local officials could fine people for not wearing masks. Is that correct?
Yeah, he did. And I would just say that Joe Biden has lost his whole damn mind. It's already kind of bad enough that the mask studies have kind of been inconclusive in the sense that there just been too many competing studies. I'm one of the people that wears a mask around people that I think might be high risk, because I just want to do whatever I can to mitigate them getting it. But it's not to prevent myself from getting it, because I try to take care of myself. I take vitamin C. I work out. I just practice good hygiene wherever I go. And that's what most people should do. I think that there should be a little bit more self-accountability. But at the end of the day, when you are trying to mandate someone to wear a mask, especially when we're looking at studies that like the one you just put out from the CDC, their new findings show that you might not make it if you wear the mask, or you might contract it faster than someone who's never worn a mask. And I do believe that there might be some extenuating circumstances, like people's immune system, people who tend to wear a mask all the time are also a little bit more cautious about putting themselves around people. And that's proven to lower your immune system over time. And so at the end of the day, that's a fear tactic, right? Because he wants to get Trump to come out and say, we don't wear masks ever. Once again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Or can we use the medicine that is available, the preventative medication that is available, to make sure that we never have to wear masks again, or at least until the next pandemic comes? And that's where I'm at. And once again, I think that's the question that we should be posing to both Donald Trump and to Joe Biden. But he's lost his damn mind. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I don't know what to tell you, but I'm not doing it.
So Lauren, to what Niko was mentioning, the CDC report that comes out and basically shows that of a study of about 314 people that was done, they were monitored after they contracted COVID, or were exposed to COVID, and 14 days later, the people who wore a mask always, 70% of them contracted COVID, and only 3.9% of those who didn't wear a mask contracted COVID. And so even the science surrounding masks seems to be dubious at best right now. But it also feels like the longer this goes on, the greater the resistance, if you want to call it that, of people who don't want to wear the mask seems to be growing. People saying, I'm tired of it. I can't imagine a group of voters saying, oh, hopefully Joe Biden will be able to institute that mask mandate come January of next year. It couldn't be soon enough. Or am I misreading that?
No, you're right. And I think, I mean, where I live, masks are mandatory in all public spaces. I have to say, part of me does like it because it means I only need to do my eye makeup, but I can kind of live in relative homeliness and anonymity. But the studies on masks are inconclusive. I think the point that needs to be brought up is that people are not wearing surgical masks, right? Cloth masks, just the regular foam ones, those aren't going to do much to protect against coronavirus. And we see that where I live, masks have been mandatory in all public spaces for a while now. We're heading into a second lockdown because cases are again surging. So the idea that if everyone wears masks, we can avoid lockdown, I don't know where Joe Biden is getting that. And from his the answer that you read out, I'm not even sure if he's talking about a federal mask mandate or simply lobbying local politicians to enact mask mandates. Obviously, the latter is a lot more constitutional sounding. But I think people are getting fed up with the mask. I know this summer my parents and I went to the zoo and we were outside and we had to wear masks outside, no one around. It doesn't make sense. And already we're seeing more and more people start to protest things like this. And especially when we see the hypocrisy from politicians and journalists who, when they're on TV, lobby hard for the mask, but then photos of them surface not wearing masks at all. People are starting to get pretty fed up, like you said.
Ben, may I just comment
I think
for a second
you're referring to there. Yeah, very quickly,
Yes.
because we have another soundbite I want to get to, but go ahead.
I just want to jump on the medical side of the mask. And to your point, Ben, about why a lot of people did actually convert wearing the masks. So the coronavirus itself has little Velcro hooks on the end. That's the way it was created. And so it hooks on the exterior of the mask, and then you're breathing it in and out. And you sit like that all the time. Sooner or later, you're going to get the virus. And that becomes a real problem. And so that's why you need like an N95 or some sort. And then you have to put it in the oven and bake it or do something, wash it or get a new one every single time. Every single time. And most of us just reuse the same old crap because we're going to go to the Trader Joe's or the Ralph's or whatever, throw it on the shelf and then put it on again. Well, if somebody did have coronavirus, coughed and wheezed, it's going to get in that cloth. You're going to get it.
Yeah, and remember, whenever you wear those masks, you're constantly touching your face, much more than you would without a mask on. Okay, so we're going to switch gears here. So just for our audience to understand, we're going to be playing more of these sound bites from Joe Biden, and that really has to do with the rules that have been set up for the release of these town halls and the video. So it's not that we're favoring Biden's side here, but we have another soundbite from Joe Biden. This one, he's talking about young African-American voters and urging them to vote. Here's what he said.
If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that.
So I don't know if you guys could see the video there, but speaking to a young black man who was there in the audience, he was saying that you have the ability, if all the young black Americans would go out and vote, you have the ability to swing this election. So, Niko, let me start with you. Number one, that's probably, there's truth to that statement. Now, obviously, when we're talking about election, we're talking about 50 different elections happening in different states. So it really depends on the swing states. But the question becomes this. Why should those young black voters vote for a Joe Biden over a Donald Trump? Because we have seen under Trump, he has done better than many other, certainly Republican presidents. But you can even argue the numbers. He's done better than Obama did in terms of black unemployment. Why should black voters automatically vote for Joe Biden?
I don't understand, Ben. Why did you ask me first? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you know why.
No, but in all seriousness, I would never, and I mean in ever, hand my vote to Joe Biden. Just a couple of days ago, Ice Cube took a lot of heat, well, and today really, because he's said, well, either side of the establishment hasn't done enough, if anything at all, for black people. And Ice Cube reached out and was reached out to by Democrats and Republicans both. Democrats told him he needs to wait till after the election to help black people. That's what the Democrats told him. Now, Trump, although maybe not altruistically, but at least strategically, had his administration contact, and they improved their plan, and that's where they came up with the platinum plan for his administration to infuse about $500 billion into the Black community through various resources in the economy. Once again, you could have lied, Biden, but basically what you were saying is that, well, you're going to vote for me regardless, or remember, everybody, you're not Black if you don't vote for him. So I also think it says a lot to me that he keeps talking about everybody should get out and vote. All the Black people should get out and vote. And of course, Biden is a segregationist. He did literally say on the floor of the Senate that he did not want his children to grow up in a racial jungle. Yes, that was him who said that. But also the Black community is the most disenfranchised when it comes to voter suppression and election fraud. Notice he says 0 to nothing about that. He never talks about shoring up election integrity to make sure that our votes actually count for something. Notice he doesn't say make sure you get something for your vote, because Joe Biden has zero intention on giving us anything for our vote. For everything that everybody wants to call Donald Trump as far as race is concerned and how he treats and discusses minorities, Joe Biden hasn't established himself as being anything different than that. He is, I mean, you could say BLM all he wants to. He can say Black Lives Matter all he wants to. But I didn't forget about the '94 crime bill. I didn't forget about the Patriot Act. And as a Black person, as a Black activist who knows my history of activism, over surveillance and spying has primarily affected, as far as publicly, to when it comes to our public figures, the Black community. Eisenhower used to spy on MLK. They used to spy on Fred Hampton. They used to spy on Angela Davis and the Black Panthers. This is something that still affects the Black community today. Joe Biden is the author of the crime bill. He's the author of the Patriot Act. I remember what he did to Anita Hill. I remember how he's treated us and where he was the initiator of the problem. Yeah, everybody had to sign to the legislation. Yeah, he had to sell it to people. But he was the one who took his racism and said, let me use this and use my political influence to make sure that it is policy. And that is the reason that I don't care if you don't like Donald Trump, but vote for the down ballot, vote for Congress, vote for your municipality. But do not hand your pride and your integrity to the man that is largely responsible for many of the problems that you and your families have dealt with for maybe 2 to 3 generations.
Niko, for the record, that's why I asked you the question. But Lauren, let me ask you now, in terms of your understanding of this, look, at the end of the day, there is a very real issue. It came up during the primaries. Kamala Harris, of all people, was the #1 person to beat up Joe Biden on that debate stage over his record in the past. That doesn't mean people can't change. It doesn't mean that he hasn't done things that were wrong in the past, and he can't say, I was wrong to have done this. But it feels like there's very little discussion of what he's done wrong, or very little time that he spends explaining what he's done wrong, and much more time with the media just kind of conveniently forgetting about this. I mean, this is a record that is a somewhat troubled record, is it not?
No, it absolutely is. And, you know, if you're an African-American voter and you're looking at Biden versus Trump, I think you need to ask yourself, every person needs to ask yourself, Biden has a long history in U.S. politics. I think it's going on, 50 years or something like that. What has he achieved, right, for the average everyday person? What would giving him the presidency do for people that he hasn't already had the chance to do for the rest of his career? And I'm not going to say that Joe Biden is a racist. I don't know him personally, but like Niko pointed out, his history with legislation is problematic. You add that on top of the fact that he chose Kamala the cop as his vice president. And I think if you're someone who is concerned about criminal justice reform, I'm not sure the Biden-Harris ticket is the way to go. And now you contrast that with the Trump administration, where if you are really passionate about the economy, again, we had record high Black entrepreneurship, low Black unemployment, very, very important. But also the Trump administration supports school choice, which I think for so many communities is a huge issue. Where you are born should not dictate the quality of education that you get. There are so many talented children out there in terrible schools. They deserve better. They deserve to be able to shop around with their parents and choose a school that supports them. And I think we would have, a lot more of economic mobility in the inner city if school choice were to be passed. And the Trump administration absolutely champions that.
Carrie, I want to read to you additional context here, and we do have some more context than what was said in this town hall. Apparently, one of the questions that was asked was about the 1994 crime bill that Niko was mentioning a minute ago. And the question was, what is your view on the crime bill that you wrote in 1994, which showed prejudice against minorities? And the former vice president's answer was, well, things have changed drastically. Now, that's all that I have here based on this tweet, is that he says things have changed drastically. But the question becomes, have they? Have things changed drastically, or was it wrong to essentially profile entire communities of people and build crime bills that would make us all safer by locking up huge swaths of the population? And did that change, or did the recognition that the end result of what that did changes the way we view it?
Well, Ben, I think you just described the sitting president. I don't recall Joe Biden ever, other than a few remarks, referring to, say, Mexicans as rapists. And I mean, unbelievable, incendiary language, stuff you wouldn't even say to your best friend. And there's a real difference, I think, if we are sober about analyzing the 1994 bill and what the sitting president, Donald John Trump, has said about entire groups of humanity. Not to mention the Muslim ban, which really ruined my trip to Egypt, by the way. I had to go through Moscow on the way to, it was really difficult because the Muslim ban affected me. I couldn't go to those places. What he has said about half of the people on this globe, Donald Trump, is unbelievable stuff. If you published it and had your grandmother read it as a Hallmark card, she would blush. Now, to answer the question, your first question about what Joe Biden said, if black people were to vote, would that make a difference? The answer is yes. Yes, it would make a difference. We saw in Alabama the famous Judge Roy Moore. Remember him? He was the one who in 1997 was filleted under the judge's bench. Yep, got in trouble. 10 commandments over his head. 98% of African-American women showed up and voted against him, and he was blown out. It shows strength in numbers. There are not enough white people in America. Doesn't Doug Jones vote
primarily with Republicans? I'm sorry, but like, doesn't Doug Jones vote primarily with Republicans, though?
Say what?
Doesn't Doug Jones, Roy Moore, he votes with Republicans. So the 98% of them that expected him to do something for them, they really haven't gotten.
They were absolutely and vehemently against Judge Roy Moore. It showed that strength in numbers matter. There are not enough white people numerically in America right now to actually, in a popular vote, elect Donald Trump. So we know that if people of color show up en masse, if people that are teenagers that might be inspired by all the school shootings that went on, if they for the first time went out and voted, it would be an overwhelming sea. It only takes 56% of the let's just say pro-Biden voting bloc to overwhelm all the voting suppression, what's going on in Wisconsin, in Georgia, in Ohio, in Michigan, the caging, all of that goes away. So strength in numbers does work.
But Carrie, that's true. But Niko's point was, and so those strength in numbers in Alabama meant no Roy Moore, and instead it meant Doug Jones, who just caucuses with Republicans, and so their lives aren't made better by those strength in numbers unless they're voting for a candidate who does something for them.
Well, it's the same thing we were talking about earlier. We've got an election with two presidential candidates, neither of whom is particularly appealing to most people. That's not to say there are some very intensely adherent people for Donald Trump. I cannot say that for Joe Biden. He's like, well, he's an okay alternative. That's about as exciting as it gets. More people probably are jazzed about Kamala Harris. Same kind of thing, not the greatest choice.
About the 1994 crime bill, though, and Niko, I'll let you jump in after this. But just, Carrie, you mentioned about Trump says a lot of things. That's true. Trump says a lot of things. But saying a lot of things, and even if they're unkind things, is not the same as writing a bill that results in millions of people's lives being altered by this. The 1994 crime bill, it opened up the death penalty for 60 new federal offenses. including drug offenses that were not related to homicide. You're talking about creating death penalty offenses for people that had nothing to do with homicide instead of with drug. And 74% of defendants, I'm getting this right now, 74% of defendants with death penalty recommendations from federal prosecutors were people of color. 44% were black, 21% were Hispanic. So comparing Trump being nasty or saying ugly things to a crime bill that resulted in those people being put on death row is really not the same thing.
It's not. Are we pretending that the what is going on the border is not policy, that ICE is not policy, that the Muslim ban is not policy? It is policy. Black Lives Matter by the millions is not a response to these police being egged on by the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, telling them to crack heads, telling them to go for it, telling them law and justice. So who are the criminals here? If we just sort of close our eyes a little bit, we're being told over and over, just like, as you point out rightly, Ben, the crime bill in 1994, it's this assumption that all black people are drug addicts. They're all the criminals. Even the judiciary, inappropriately, disproportionately, is putting Latinos and people of color in the slammer. Why is that? That's really the question.
But and Niko, it went further than that, right? It actually said, for these offenses, we should execute more people, did it not?
Yeah, no, it did. And let's not talk about how much it furthered the private prison system and how much the Democrats and a lot of Republicans, too, profited off of this. I mean, and if we're going to talk about the kids in cages at the border, which we absolutely should, why don't we talk about the fact that that system was created under Obama and it privatized that detention center system? And just, for example, here in Homestead, $277 a day per child. That didn't start under Donald Trump. That started under Joe Biden and Barack Obama. And let's talk about the fact that they wreaked havoc all through South America, which caused a lot of the massive migration, which of course subsequently caused Barack Obama to deport more immigrants than any other president combined. Let's talk about the fact that if we're talking about Black Lives Matter, let's talk about them in the States. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and in fairness, that does go back to Reagan. What happened in South America and Central America goes back to Reagan, and it was continued through Clinton and then through Bush and then through Obama and Biden and now to Trump, even to Trump today. So what we've seen is a continuation of those policies that drive people out of those areas and have left really entire people groups around the world disenfranchised. All right, I want to move though just slightly over. We have another soundbite.
Rotten, stinking government at large. I mean, really, it's not like which ball team do you bat for. It's the system is really corrupt and broken. And I think this is where we all share the same turf. This is where the Venn diagrams overlap beautifully with everybody, no matter what side they're on. Food, water, shelter. We all want it. Education. We want a safe place to live. We want to have like a good quality of life. That's what we want.
But I think I think it's important to mention, though, like, then we should stop trying to present false choices to people and instead do what has gotten things done in the past. Before Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, and the rest were assassinated, JFK and Martin Luther King did not like each other. RFK had to drag them to the table because Martin Luther King made it very clear, I'm challenging whoever wins this election, regardless of who wins it. You never knew who he endorsed or who he supported because it wasn't important. The important thing was getting millions of people to fight the system to get what we want, because their lobbyists are going to be there. The Congress people are still going to be there. They're going to win their elections however they win them. There's no election integrity. So why not just spend time challenging the system, informing people how corrupt the system is, and then subsequently holding people accountable, then pretending rather than giving a vote to someone who literally can't remember what he ate for breakfast this morning, and then he can't remember the last black person he threw in jail.
Okay, let's listen to this next soundbite because it's and Lauren, I'm going to have you be the first one to respond to it. But this is about policing in particular and how do police de-escalate. Let's go.
You have to teach people how to de-escalate circumstances. De-escalate. So instead of anybody coming at you, the first thing you do is shoot to kill. You shoot them in the leg.
Okay, Lauren, you heard that? The way that you teach them is not to shoot to kill. Instead, you teach them to shoot them in the leg. I mean, this is not the first time that Biden has said it. It's an unbelievably dumb statement for various reasons. I think not the least of which is the fact that for human beings, we have an artery, a major artery in the top part of that leg, that if a police officer is trying to shoot someone in the leg and hits it, you'll kill them almost instantly. But that aside, the impracticality, Lauren, of trying to shoot someone in the leg instead of shooting to kill.
Well, I am a strong supporter of de-escalation tactics with the police. And I think, honestly, I am for police receiving more training with de-escalation. I am for things like body cam to increase accountability, not just for police, but for citizens as well, so that if there is ever a dispute over what happened, we can go and check it and verify that nothing was done wrong. With that being said, though, there is a reason why when police usually fire, they do it in a lethal fashion. It's because it's hard to shoot someone in the leg, right? Those are smaller targets, not to mention, like you said, the femoral artery can lead you to bleed out if you're shot there. It's not an easy tactic to come up with the best way to safely neutralize a potential threat. I mean, that's why police have things like tasers. But even as we recently saw with the Jacob Blake case, those aren't always foolproof either. If someone, it's completely possible to be tased and then keep going. And what is the police officer supposed to do then? I don't have a good solution for that, but I'm happy that he's talking about things like training for police officers to make the current hostilities a little bit better. And I also think that police officers should be spending more time with students. I think I was taught this when I was younger, and I know a lot of people aren't. Police need to know the citizens' rights, and the citizens need to know their own rights, but also the obligations to the officers. So I think there's a lot more time that could be spent ameliorating the relationships between citizens and police officers.
But following up on that, and I agree with you, I mean, there has got to be better training. There has to be more time spent on training and not just de-escalating, but also demilitarizing police, right? Because we certainly have a militarization concept built into policing in this country that becomes increasingly militarized, which results in more aggressive tactics in many cases. Having said that, the answer to that cannot possibly be then to defund police, because the more money you take out of police departments, the less money there is for training. Wouldn't a better solution be to say, rather than taking money out of a police department, we're going to better control where that money goes, how it is spent, and building programs that actually, create a better relationship between officers and communities?
Right. And actually, polls have shown that the majority of Black people actually support more police. That's not coming from me. They've actually done studies on this. And that's because, when we talk about things like crime, unfortunately, a lot of that is concentrated in non-white neighborhoods. Right. So this is a very targeted problem. And I think if you want to actually help minority communities and immigrant communities, you have to talk about crime. Right. Because these are the people that are being affected every day. It's their homes, their personal belongings that are being stolen, themselves that are being assaulted, right? So this is really an issue that I think if you want to talk about law and order, just pushing the line of defund the police, abolish the police, like we've seen some more radical activists try to say this summer, that's not going to resonate with mainstream voters.
And Ben, you really hit a beautiful target there. Yeah. Talking about the militarization of the police. And this is something that Joe Biden gets credit for, because when he was vice president under Obama, there was all this remainder military equipment from Afghanistan and Iraq, and they had all these tanks and mortars and different vehicles, and they had to get rid of them. So the best way was to recycle them through the municipal police forces, which is why here in LA, we have tanks at schools. It's shocking and appalling. And frankly, if I were in a tank sooner or later, I'd probably want to test it out too. Just like a lot of cops want to put 22 shells into somebody's back. This becomes a real problem. So yes, dialing that back, if it's training or if it's just mental illness, whatever it is, it's got to be dealt with. And you're probably not then going to see millions of Black Lives Matter and this matters and that matters. You're going to end up with, in the 1970s, I think historically, there were ads on TV, call a friend, call a cop. And that was the idea of de-escalation back then.
Well, and Niko, what about that point that Lauren made in terms of those specific communities that are low-income communities, right? Really, and it's irregardless of the color of the people living there. In poor white communities, the crime rate is much higher. So really, it's an economic issue. People who live in socially impoverished and economically impoverished areas suffer the most crime. People who live in immigrant communities suffer more crime because they don't trust police or they fear being deported, and so they don't call the police. And so you actually have more victims in those communities. And the idea of removing police officers from those communities, doesn't that just turn them over to kind of the worst elements in those communities who now run roughshod?
To be clear, I don't think there's actually more crime in those communities. I think that if we look at Upper East Side, Upper West Side, and Wall Street, there's plenty of crime committed there. However, people don't consider it crime because they wear a white country, and I cannot think of a single time where like a black person was accused of committing a serious crime or even a petty crime outside of maybe drinking underage. That had nothing to do with the color of his skin, more so the opportunity that was available to them. We have to look historically at why these communities look the way they do. When we look at redlining and how police were told to over-police there. In New York, officers of color and black police officers said they had to leave because they were disgusted because they were told you're not allowed to walk the beat in Upper East Side or Upper West Side. You have to go to Brooklyn. You have to go to the Bronx. You have to go to these places because we have a quota to meet. And if you accidentally bully some congressperson's daughter, then we're going to be the ones that feel the flame for it. We got to look at the Breonna Taylor situation. Just that. The AG Daniel Cameron lied to the media saying that the jury was in consensus with the prosecution that those two cops did not deserve to be prosecuted. However, they never got the option. And Attorney General Daniel Cameron pretended as if they did. So the jury's not even allowed to do its job. The Attorney General is not holding the cops accountable. We know about the qualified immunity issue. So we have to look at the people who are allocating the money, who's giving the money, who's doing the training, who's receiving the training. People that they couldn't cut it for the military. They couldn't cut it for the Army. I mean, I was in the military, and I mean, we received more training. Honestly, when I was at Fort Bragg, we did a lot of janitorial duties, to be honest with you, unless you're deployed. But we received more training than them, yet they carry a gun every single day, and we receive less money, yet LAPD has 50% of their budget going to the police department. Or excuse me, LA has 50% of their budget going to the police department. So is it let's worry about the crime problem? Or, well, hold on, how did we even get to this point? And why are these communities policed like this? And we always talk about accountability in this scenario, but people stealing from the average citizen every single day aren't being held accountable. And the cops who are also committing crimes that when they swore to prevent this are not being held accountable. I think that we have to address the overall power structure. And yeah, we can talk about better training and things like that, but do they actually want to be trained better? Is this a training issue, or is this a desire that some cops have? And I think it has to be addressed. In the Breonna Taylor situation, for example, that police unit was part of a gentrification project to get those people out of there. So they did their job. That's why they weren't prosecuted.
But isn't part of the problem? You mentioned LA, and it sounds like when it comes to Los Angeles, we know NYPD, LAPD, massive amounts of their budget are going to the police department, right? But isn't that an investment? Isn't what's actually happening there that so many municipalities across the country, taxation via tickets and fines and fees issued by police become line items in their budgets? And there seems to be no accountability for that part of this issue. It's talked about on so many levels, but who's holding the mayors of cities responsible when those cities literally have their police departments? You mentioned quotas, Niko. A huge part of what they do is to go around and collect fines and fees from people. In fact, when the whole Ferguson story happened, and I was actually in Ferguson, Mike Brown was killed there. And then, of course, the DOJ came in and investigated. And what they found was the problem was not that police were killing large numbers of black people in Ferguson. The real issue was that police were using Ferguson as a way of stopping everyone who drove through that town, whether they lived there or not, to collect fines and fees. And it became a massive cash grab for the city of Ferguson, which I believe is the poorest municipality in the state of Missouri. So my question is this: where is the accountability when municipalities have utilized police forces in this way and then turn around and say, well, we need to cut your budgets because there's bad cops in there? And there are no question there are bad cops. There's also bad city councils and bad mayors utilizing those cops in order to fill their budgets. Niko, I'll start with you and then I'll go around.
Well, I mean, Ben, I would have to 100% agree with you. I mean, I think it goes back to what Ice Cube said. There has to be a complete restructuring of this system. You can't allow like mayors of these Democratic towns who will scream BLM and then give these police massive budgets, and it's almost like it's a reward for hitting their quotas. And what's more disgusting, I mean, if you ever been through Valdosta, Georgia, that area is having a federal investigation for similar behavior. And so you get pulled over. You either pay a lawyer to get out of the ticket, you pay the ticket itself, or you pay a small fee to be represented by the public defender, who's going to tell you to take a deal that's going to involve you also paying some money. And it's not innocent until proven guilty because it's not a criminal offense and it's just a fine. So that when you're talking about that, it goes back to what I was saying. So what exactly are the goals of these police departments? Is it really to protect the community, or is it simply to serve the elites and the political elite specifically, like we have seen so many other arms of our federal and local governments do over these last 200-300 years this country has been around?
Lauren, is this an issue for even a presidential candidate to be talking about? Because these really are local issues at their core. Isn't the president just issuing basically statements from a bully pulpit?
It is hard when you talk about federal powers in this, because absolutely these things are not traditionally the place of the president to decide, right? This is for your local municipality, and maybe on a broader state you can say perhaps the governor as well. But President Trump, he is not responsible for the policing that happens in New York, in California, or anywhere else. And I think it shouldn't be that way, right? I think different communities have different needs. And I think for someone in Washington, D.C. to be deciding what type of policy happens on the streets in Los Angeles just does not make sense. And in terms of accountability, like you folks are talking about, I think voters absolutely need to take initiative, right? These are all positions that you can actually vote for. But I think there's this lack of civic engagement that a lot of people have. They may be really frustrated with their police department, with what happens at the city council, but they don't show up on those election days. And that's why I admire grassroots activists who actually get out there and encourage people to go out and cast their votes, and who educate people on, okay, so this person is what's responsible for this. Oh, you're not happy with this? Well, that's this mayor who's responsible. We don't have enough of that. And it's very easy to start blaming the Joe Bidens and the Trumps of the world because they're on TV, they're big names. But I mean, local politics affect your lives a lot more than most people think.
Mm-hmm. But that's also where the power is, right, Carrie? I mean, the real power in voting, the more local it becomes, the more accountability there should be. It seems like we have an opposite system, right? It's inverted because of exactly what Lauren said, because these high profile, it's kind of, more, for lack of a better term, it's a little sexier when you're talking about national office, the presidency, senators, congressmen. But when we're talking about those boring local races, those boring mayoral and city council races, those are the ones that actually affect people's lives much more than a presidential election would. And yet it seems to get the least interest from people.
Well, Ben, I got to say, they're sure not boring here in this town, the local races. I mentioned our mayor before. It's neither a Democratic or Republican problem. And I think Niko hit a really good vein of truth there, that it really is about power. And Los Angeles has such a massive police force for a reason, which has nothing to do with writing tickets. They write almost no tickets. The only thing that's illegal in LA is jaywalking, which is perfectly normal in New York. Like, who wouldn't? Here, $140 ticket for jaywalking. Well, of course, the smallest streets are 4-lane highways. But that's it. You can rape and shoot and kill. It's fine with the cops, but don't jaywalk. You'll get a ticket for that. The city of West Hollywood, where I live, makes the population is 36,000 people, $35 million a year in parking tickets. Not from the cops, but they're sort of meter maids, these paramilitary people. That said, let's look at the LAPD. Why do they have such a huge budget? Let's go back to 1916, a guy named General Otis. And he was a battlefield general during the Spanish-American War. He was one of the only people who would volunteer to machine gun Filipinos into a pit. So they made him a general. This general realizes that if he brings water to the desert, soon to be known as Los Angeles, and he can start to grow orange groves and do all of this cool stuff in LA, well, he's going to be a very rich man. He needs a newspaper. What is the newspaper back then? Pre-TV, pre-radio. It is the voice of policy. He starts the newspaper, the LA Times, and by 1994, the LAPD owns the LA Times. The LA Times owns the LAPD. In fact, just 4 years ago, the fund that the police fund, the retirement fund, now owns the newspaper. Back and forth, back and forth. So the police are the newspaper, which are the policy, which are the politicians, which are the developers, the land developers, all funneling back into some of the most corrupt politicians. Most people don't even know the name of the mayor of Los Angeles, the media capital of Earth, the second largest city in the United States. Who's the mayor? People don't know. They know New York, they know Chicago, LA, no idea. It is a mess of corruption, and it's the newspaper and the cops together working together. And I'll just finish with this. West Hollywood, where I live, was founded because the LAPD notoriously used to beat the gays, beat them dead. I happen to be one of those, you know. And so they created this neutral city called West Hollywood, the line of demarcation where the LAPD stopped and it became the county, became West Hollywood. And so the cops literally could not walk across the border. Russians during the 1980s had left the Soviet Union. So it was the gays and the Russians, not exactly best bedfellows here, but they got together, created a city where the LAPD could not enter and beat the hell out of them. That's how brutal the LAPD are, and they haven't changed a bit. Look at Ted Rall, the famous cartoonist of the Los Angeles Times, who was fired for doing comedy cartoons, satire cartoons, about the chief of police beating up people of color. He got fired. He settled $25 million and then turned it away. All he wanted was an apology. Don't we all at this point?
Exactly right. Carrie and Niko, thank you guys so much for being part of this. That's our first half hour here, hour and a half. Can you believe it went by that fast? Of our coverage as the town hall continues.
The way the presidential debates are set up, there have been many complaints that the moderators are biased one way or another, that the questions are not comprehensive enough, and that the format of the debate, where each candidate only gets 2-minute responses, is just not very informative for the general public. So I think the whole system needs to be reformed.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, there's been a lot of talk already about the moderators who are a part of these debates, about the system that's been set up around them after our first debate, questions about whether or not there's even, the whole system needs to be reformed, starting with the Commission on Presidential Debates that oversees these, calls itself nonpartisan, when in fact it's actually bipartisan. Carrie, I mean, what do you think about, the news that Steve Scully was suspended, but also does that just continually taint this debate process that seems to get more dysfunctional every election cycle?
Well, taint is probably the right word here. I'm sure a lot of people think that's exactly what he is. It's no surprise either, or it's certainly a huge coincidence that Twitter, as we speak, appears to be down globally. So who knows? But naughty is naughty. And when people study journalism, one of the first things they're taught is be honest, because you are the voice and the eyes of the people who can't get to the places you're able to get to. So you have a responsibility. And if you screw that up, well, you do need to be radically punished. It's interesting. The Constitution says nothing about debates. So this is a recent invention. And it's kind of remarkable that the President of the United States, for the first time probably in all